Christmas dinner was supposed to be warm, joyful, and peaceful. Instead, it turned into the night my daughter-in-law decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. She glared across the table and shouted that I wasn't even half the woman her mother was. I didn't argue. I just folded my hands and stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I was raised better than to trade insults at the table. But my son slowly stood up, placed his napkin down, and said something that turned the entire room cold. Then he made one phone call, and in less than 5 minutes, her confidence shattered. My name is Helena Marston, and I am 71 years old. Christmas has always meant full tables, warm laughter, and soft candlelight flickering across familiar faces. I spent the morning basting the turkey, setting the table with my best china, and humming the same carols I once sang with my children when they were small. By evening, the house glowed, garlands shining, tree lights twinkling, and the smell of cinnamon filling every corner. The family arrived with gifts and hugs, taking seats around the table I'd prepared with so much love. I never expected conflict to walk in with them. I told myself that Christmas softens hearts, that kindness always finds a seat at the table. I didn't know the words spoken that night would slice through that peace like broken glass, or that the silence that followed would reveal where loyalty truly lived. Dinner began with polite conversation, clinking cutlery, and the rustle of wrapping paper as the grandchildren opened small gifts. Then, without warning, tension caught fire. A simple disagreement over nothing important spiraled, and suddenly the young woman across from her, the one who'd married her son, raised her voice. In front of everyone, she spat out the words, "On your best day, you're not even half the woman my mother is." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Forks paused, smiles vanished. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't heat of the moment frustration. It was measured, deliberate humiliation. And for a heartbeat, the room forgot how to breathe. Every pair of eyes shifted toward her, waiting for a reaction, a protest, a tear, an argument. But years of life had taught her something powerful. Dignity doesn't need to shout. She simply placed her fork down, folded her napkin carefully, and sat with quiet grace. No bitterness, no sarcasm, just calm stillness. She refused to stain Christmas with anger, even if others already had. Inside, the words hurt, of course they did, but she would not bargain with disrespect. Remaining silent wasn't a weakness. It was strength wrapped in restraint. And that silence echoed louder than any comeback ever could. Her son stared at his wife in stunned disbelief, as though he'd just heard a stranger speaking. Then he slowly pushed his chair back and stood up, not dramatically, not aggressively, just firmly. He looked at his mother first, a silent apology in his eyes, then turned to his wife. His voice was calm, almost too calm. He said if her mother was truly worth twice as much, then she should also be ready to fund twice the lifestyle. The room shifted. Laughter didn't follow. His meaning was clear. Gratitude had been replaced with entitlement for far too long. Silence swallowed the table. Even the children sensed something irreversible had just happened. His wife's confidence evaporated, replaced by confusion and then fear, because he wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. One quiet call, he said, would change everything about how the household finances worked. Suddenly, the insult didn't feel clever anymore. It felt reckless. Every unspoken truth that had been quietly tolerated now hovered dangerously close to the surface. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me. He simply spoke with a steadiness that made the truth more terrifying. He reminded her, and the room, of who had quietly supported what, whose sacrifices had filled the gaps, whose kindness had been taken for granted. For the first time, his wife realized the ground beneath her security might not belong to her side of the family after all. That phone call wasn't a threat, it was a line being drawn. A reminder that respect is the first bill that must always be paid. She stayed still through it all, hands folded, posture relaxed, eyes soft, not because she needed defending, but because she finally saw that she wasn't alone in valuing dignity. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was strength. And in that moment, her son's quiet loyalty spoke louder than any insult ever could. Christmas dinner didn't end with shouting. It ended with truth finally taking its place at the table, and the first ripple of consequences beginning to form. He excused himself from the table with a steadiness that made everyone uneasy. No raised voice. No dramatic exit, just a quiet, "Excuse me for a moment," as he walked into the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. The rest of the room buzzed with tension. His wife tried to laugh it off, saying he was being overly sensitive, but even her voice shook. She sat still, eyes lowered, listening to faint murmurs from the next room. She had never interfered with her son's marriage, but tonight something sacred had shifted. Respect had been trampled on, and now truth was walking in to replace it. The call wasn't to argue. It wasn't to threaten. It was to a quiet man at the bank and another at his firm, the people who handled the accounts, the mortgage, and the business investments. Calmly, professionally, he requested adjustments. Funds that supported the household, subscriptions, cards, and transfers, all paused pending review under his authorization alone. Because as it turned out, every major bill attached to that household had been paid from accounts he controlled. And much of that stability had been built over years with help from the very woman who had just been insulted. When he returned, he didn't make a speech. He simply explained, gently but clearly, that the lifestyle being compared so casually had never been funded by his wife's family. Not once. The home, the vacations, the business loan that rescued her job, all of it rested on shoulders she had just belittled. Shock rippled across her face as puzzle pieces she'd ignored finally locked together. The illusion shattered. Her parents, who'd boasted so loudly about their support, had contributed little beyond criticism. Quiet generosity had held everything up, and tonight that silence finally spoke. She tried to backtrack. First denial, then excuses, then tears, insisting she didn't mean it like that. But words, once spoken, don't evaporate, they stain, and the one person she dismissed as less than half a woman had been the heart of the family all along. Her husband didn't shout. He simply said he would never allow anyone, even his wife, to disrespect his mother again. If admiration for her own mother mattered so much, then financial reliance should begin there too. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. Her confidence crumbled, replaced by fear of losing the life she'd mistaken for entitlement. No one knew what to say. Even her parents stared at their plates, unable to spin the story in their favor. For the first time, the older woman wasn't invisible at the table. She was the quiet center of gravity. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply poured herself a glass of water and continued eating, as though peace had finally been restored. The only sound was the tick of the clock and the soft clinking of cutlery. Respect had returned to its rightful place, carried not by anger, but by truth. The balance in the room shifted so completely it was almost visible. Her son spoke calmly about boundaries, about gratitude, kindness, and the difference between partnership and dependence. His wife realized that love had been protecting her, not owing her. And the woman she'd insulted? She sat with quiet dignity, finally seen not as an accessory to the family, but as its foundation. Control had never belonged to arrogance. It had always belonged to the people who loved it without announcement. Before the evening ended, he made one final statement. Disrespect would never again be served at their table, not toward his mother, nor anyone who had sacrificed for their family. If comparisons were going to be made, they would be based on character, not ego. His wife nodded slowly, realizing this wasn't anger. It was a line, a boundary, a promise. And as the candles flickered low, the night closed not with rage, but with a new and undeniable truth. Silence may be gentle, but it is never weak. The next morning, he called a quiet family meeting, no drama, just clarity. He calmly explained exactly how their lifestyle had been sustained. The mortgage he covered alone, the school fees, the insurance plans, the loan he took to support her business when it faltered. And woven through it all was the steady support of the woman who'd just been insulted, the one who never asked for recognition. His wife listened, stunned, realizing that comfort had never been guaranteed. It had been built brick by brick through effort and sacrifice, not image. The comparison she had thrown across the table now felt shallow and cruel. For the first time, she saw the difference between real strength and loud pride, and shame settled quietly over her shoulders. He didn't punish me. He didn't threaten. He simply announced that until respect became the foundation of their home, extra support would pause. No more supplemental transfers. No more quiet rescues when budgets slipped. From now on, responsibilities would match reality. His wife stared at him, realizing he meant it, not out of anger, but out of principle. She'd grown used to safety nets she never acknowledged. Now those nets were gone, replaced with accountability she'd never had to face. The silence was heavy but honest. And honesty, though painful, was long overdue. Bills, schedules, and numbers suddenly demanded attention. The home that had once felt effortless now revealed its true cost and how much had been quietly carried on her behalf. She watched her daughter-in-law struggle between pride and fear, finally understanding that comfort doesn't come from entitlement, it comes from gratitude. Meanwhile, the older woman stayed gentle and kind, never rubbing salt in fresh wounds. She still cooked, still helped the grandchildren, still smiled softly. Her dignity only highlighted the immaturity of the insult that started it all. Reality had arrived, patient, steady, undeniable. Eventually, apologies came, first clumsy, then sincere. Tears, shaking hands, and long pauses filled the room. Her daughter-in-law admitted the insult had come from insecurity, not truth. She confessed that envy had clouded judgment and comparison had hardened her heart. The older woman listened quietly. She didn't rush forgiveness, nor did she withhold it. She simply asked for one thing: respect, in public, in private, and always. Apologies feel fragile when new, but this one finally sounded real. Forgiveness is easy compared to rebuilding trust. Trust requires time, weeks, months, sometimes years of changed choices and softened tones. Her son stayed protective, making sure boundaries stayed firm. The older woman didn't isolate herself, but she didn't shrink either. She allowed the relationship to heal slowly, refusing to pretend nothing had happened. For the first time, her worth no longer depended on anyone recognizing it. She knew it herself, and that quiet certainty changed everything. They all agreed to new rules, not written on paper, but etched into behavior. No public disrespect, no comparisons, no jokes that wound, gratitude spoken openly. And most importantly, if kindness leaves the room, the conversation ends. These weren't restrictions. They were protections for love, for dignity, for peace. Her daughter-in-law finally understood that marriage isn't built just on romance, but on how you treat the people who raised the person you love. The marriage bent, but it didn't break. Testing revealed what was true and what needed work. Her son remained calm and steady, choosing loyalty without cruelty. His wife chose humility over pride slowly, consistently, learning to appreciate the woman she once belittled. And the older woman, she stayed exactly as she had always been, gracious, grounded, and stronger than anyone had ever realized. Because real strength never shouts, it simply remains. A week later, they gathered again, this time without decorations, gifts, or festive distraction. Just a quiet living room, soft lamplight, and honesty waiting patiently. Her son began by thanking everyone for coming, then explained that the purpose wasn't to revisit the argument, it was to rebuild the respect that should have never been questioned. She sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap, not demanding anything, simply present. Her daughter-in-law shifted nervously, knowing words spoken carelessly had rippled much farther than she ever intended. This wasn't a confrontation. It was accountability. And accountability has a way of clearing the fog so truth can finally breathe. Truth arrived gently, not as accusation, but as reflection. Her son spoke about his childhood, the sacrifices made quietly, the nights his mother worked late only to still pack lunches and iron uniforms before sunrise. He reminded his wife that the strength she admired in her own mother didn't diminish another woman. It never should. Comparison, he said, is the thief of gratitude. His wife listened with tears gathering in her eyes as she realized the injury hadn't been just to a person, it had been to a lifetime of unseen love. And that realization hurt in a way that heals. They talked openly about what respect actually means, not politeness when convenient, but deep acknowledgement of value. Respect meant defending each other in rooms where the other person wasn't present. It meant choosing gentleness when pride begged to speak instead. It meant honoring the sacrifices that built the foundation they now lived on. The older woman didn't lecture. She only said one sentence: love without respect always breaks. And in that moment, everyone understood respect isn't a gift you give when you feel like it. It's the ground you stand on together. Tears followed, not dramatic, but cleansing. Her daughter-in-law finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd said. Shame, regret, vulnerability, all of it surfaced. She apologized again, this time without justification, without excuses. And the older woman did what strong women often do. She opened her arms. They hugged not to erase what happened, but to begin healing the space it had created. It wasn't perfect. Healing never is, but honesty had finally replaced pride, and that changed everything. In the days that followed, change didn't come through speeches. It came through small, consistent actions. Softer tones, thoughtful gestures, appreciation spoken aloud instead of assumed. Her daughter-in-law invited her to lunch, asked for advice, and most importantly, listened. She began to truly see the woman she had once dismissed. Respect wasn't forced. It grew steady, sincere, rooted in humility. And with every small step forward, the air in the house grew lighter. Growth always offers a choice, evolve or deny. She chose growth, not because she was weak, but because she was brave enough to admit she had been wrong. Some relatives expected lingering bitterness. Instead, what they found was a family slowly becoming stronger than before. The older woman didn't demand perfection. She only valued effort, and effort was finally being shown. That effort rebuilt trust brick by fragile brick. By the time winter softened into spring, a new balance had formed. The message was clear and unspoken. Disrespect would never again have a seat at their table. Not toward mothers, not toward each other. Love had been tested, and rather than crumble, it chose integrity. The older woman carried herself just as she always had, quietly, gracefully, with a strength that didn't need to announce itself. And now, finally, everyone saw it for what it truly was. Just when it seemed the storm had finally passed, life opened the door to a completely new beginning. Stay with me. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Peace didn't return like a fanfare, it drifted back quietly, like soft snow falling outside a warm window. Meals together became gentle again, conversations slowed. Laughter, small at first, began to reappear. She noticed the difference most in the silences. They were no longer sharp or uncomfortable, they were simply still. Her presence in the home no longer felt like an afterthought. Chairs were pulled out for her. Opinions were asked, not ignored. And she didn't need grand apologies anymore. The change in tone was apology enough. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of respect. And now, finally, both lived under the same roof again. Her relationship with her son deepened in a way that surprised them both. He visited more often, sitting at the kitchen table just to talk the way he used to when he was a boy. Sometimes they spoke about difficult things, aging, marriage, regrets. Other times they simply reminisced about burnt cookies and lost homework. She realized that the greatest gift wasn't his defense that night, it was the reassurance that she still mattered deeply. Their bond no longer depended on unspoken gratitude. It rested on open love, steady, mature, unshakable. True loyalty revealed itself not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency. He didn't allow careless comments anymore, not from anyone. If someone tried to belittle her, the conversation ended. Not with hostility, but with calm firmness. His wife began to mirror that loyalty too, gently correcting anyone who spoke unkindly. Loyalty, she realized, isn't about choosing sides, it's about choosing what's right even when it's uncomfortable. And for the first time, she felt protected not because she asked to be, but because she deserved to be. They all agreed silently at first, then in words, that respect would be the foundation of every gathering moving forward. No comparisons, no cutting humor disguised as jokes, no allowing outsiders to disrespect the family that had bled and worked to build everything they had. These were not rules meant to confine, they were promises meant to protect. She felt safer now, not because anyone tiptoed around her, but because kindness finally had a permanent seat at the table. Gratitude began to sound different, not rushed, not obligatory, real. Her daughter-in-law started noticing the small things, the meals, the patience with the grandchildren, the wisdom shared over coffee. She began saying thank you without being prompted. And more importantly, she meant it. Appreciation replaced entitlement, and the house began to feel warmer. The older woman never demanded credit. But genuine appreciation has a way of healing old wounds, one sincere word at a time. Through it all, she never changed who she was. She remained calm, gentle, soft-spoken, carrying herself with the same grace she always had. The difference now was that her dignity was finally seen rather than overlooked. People sometimes think strength must be loud to be real, but hers had always been quiet, the kind that holds families together even when no one notices. Now, they noticed. And that recognition felt like sunlight after a long winter. One evening, as the lights from the Christmas tree glowed softly against the window, she reflected on the journey. She had been insulted, yet she chose grace. She had been silent, yet truth defended her. And in the end, she didn't win because someone lost. She won because respect, long overdue, finally stood beside her. A mother's worth, she realized, isn't measured in noise, titles, or comparison. It lives in sacrifice, love, loyalty, and the steady way she keeps showing up, even when she is wounded. And as the family laughed gently around her, she knew one thing with certainty. Her worth had never been half of anyone else's. It had always been whole, and now, everyone finally saw it.